This is the story behind the formation of the Y Indian Guide Center. Excerpts from a taped interview with Mr. Harold Keltner, its founder, and a longtime worker and director for the YMCA.
In the large city of Buffalo, New York, the YMCA found itself a clearinghouse of securing speakers for annual father and son banquets. I happened to have the responsibility for that and secured, I suppose, hundreds of speakers over several years for the various churches.
Having realized the need for a strong father and son relationship in the family circle, Mr. Keltner was involved in various YMCA youth-oriented programs. Sometimes the results left much to be desired.
But it was so obvious that the father and son banquet was only a shot in the arm towards better relationships. It happened once a year. The fathers came and told how wonderful the boys were, and the boys said how wonderful the fathers were. But actually, when the meeting was over, they forgot all about the relationship for another year.
Other programs were tried in addition to the father and son banquets, but only one proved to be effective. An outdoor program for fathers and sons, including Indian heritage and folklore.
This appeal for help was right down my alley because of my interest in Indians, and I knew that somehow it had to be linked up. Any program like that that dealt with youth had to be linked up with their hero worship of the American Indian. No other interest, it seemed to me, could appeal to a little boy around 7 or 8 years of age.
In addition to being a YMCA director, Mr. Keltner was a lover of the outdoors. In his travels into Canada, he met an Ojibwe Indian, Joe Friday, who was later to become instrumental in helping establish the Y Indian Guides.
In the early 1900s, when I took my wife on a delayed second honeymoon to the North Country, my father went along, and we got off at Temagami Station in northern Ontario, about 300 miles north of Toronto. We hired a canoe, camped on the islands, and had many wonderful fishing trips with copper line after the lake trout of that region. One day we decided to make a little trip to visit the southernmost post of the Hudson Bay Fur Company on Bear Island, an Indian village. We started out in fair weather, but halfway there were met with one of those sudden storms which frequent that part of the country, and had quite a time battling the waves. We finally managed to turn around and were cast on a rocky island. It was storming and hailing, raining hard. We crawled under the canoe and waited the storm out. When we got near to Bear Island, we noticed a group of Indians and white people gathered together on the dock. Evidently, they had seen us, as they told us later, and thought that we'd gone down in the storm. Some fellow from the crowd hollered out, "Keltner, what are you doing there?" It turned out to be an old friend of mine from the YMCA in Buffalo, New York. When he introduced me to some of his friends, he said, "I'm a missionary up here now. I want to introduce you to my first church member." And turning around, I was introduced to a big, tall Ojibwe Indian whom we called Joe Friday. That was our first meeting. From that time on, Joe and I spent many hours in the woods. Many a night we stayed on an island, and we could hear the fish splashing in the water, the wolves howl, the husky dogs on Bear Island answering, the moose call. And far away from civilization, a fellow gets a chance to do a little thinking. And there I had a little clearer idea of what I was trying to do to organize the first tribe, which we later called the Indian Guides. When we established a new camp down in St. Louis in the Ozark Hills of Missouri, it seemed that it'd be fitting to have a real Indian teach the boys how to paddle a canoe, set traps, and learn much of the Indian lore of the forest. So then I called my old friend Joe Friday from Canada. We decided that we would use him every summer. And he spoke many a time to father and son banquets. On one occasion, when he had finished his talk, so many of the fathers crowded around him to ask him about fishing and hunting moose and so on, that the little boys had barely a chance to crowd in at all to talk to the Indian themselves. And it dawned on me that the American father was as interested in Indians as the little fellows were. And that gave me the idea of using the Indian program in this program for fathers and sons. Joe lived long enough until 1955 to see the fruits of his work in helping establish the Indian Guides. How he would have loved to have been here in this place and seen what the Indian Guides had inspired the white man to do in memory of the American Indian. Very few American Indians probably have done as much for the white man as Joe Friday in helping establish the Indian Guides.